Meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. Okay.
Ken, setting up your meeting for YouTube live. יופי. אוקיי, אני מכניסה את האנשים.
בסדר גמור.
בהצלחה.
כבר 40.
כן, כן, הם מצטרפים צ'יק צ'ק. כן, setting up your meeting for YouTube live.
Shalom, shalom. I see Rabbi Jerry Epstein. David Fishman.
Erev Tov from Chicago, from Mariah.
Yofi. From Mariah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when you were with us.
I was supposed to be with you again in February.
Oh, okay.
Men tracht and Gott lacht.
When there is time, there is hope.
I see Howie Snyderman all the way from Edmonton, Alberta. Wow.
Ah.
A small world.
Good morning from Seal Beach, California.
יפה, תודה רבה. מוריה, אני רוצה לראות את כולם על המסך, לא להיות באמצע. מה אני עושה? view.
צריך view ואז לעשות gallery view.
Gallery, okay, יופי. It switched by itself, I don't know why.
Shalom לכם מקנזס סיטי.
Shalom, shalom, Alan. Baruch haba. Rabbi Vernon Kurtz מירושלים. Marion Juster from Israel. Okay, יפה. Dalia Mark. Shalom, Dalia.
ערב טוב, ערב טוב.
ערב טוב. David Bar Yaakov, Shalom David. Marilyn Wind, hello. Nice to see familiar names and some faces.
Hi, David. How are you?
Baruch Hashem, good.
Great.
Okay. Well, I think in contradiction to all of Jewish tradition, we're going to start almost on time. So, Bruchim Abayim, welcome to Zooming into Tu BiShvat. This is the fourth holiday we're celebrating via Zoom. We had a large Tikkun Leil Shavuot in Hebrew and English, Rosh Hashanah, Chanukah, and now Tu BiShvat. So once we've passed three holidays, it's a chazaka. We have to continue doing this, and I hope that we will. It's nice to see people from all over Israel and from all over the world, and we hope that you will tell your friends and more people will join us in the future. My specific topic today, for those of you who don't know me, my name is David Kolinkin. I'm the president of the Schechter Institutes Incorporated, and I teach Talmud and Halacha at Schechter in the graduate school and the rabbinical school. My topic today is the Jewish attitude towards the environment, some basic principles. Before I get to those principles, I'd like to explain why I'm talking about the environment, which might be muvan me'elav, it might be self-understood, but really it isn't. If you open up the Mishnah to the first Mishnah in the tractate of Rosh Hashanah, it talks about Arba'a Rashi Shanim, that there are 4 new years, and one of them, of course, you know, which is Rosh Hashanah and Tishrei. And the last one is Be'echad BiShvat Rosh Hashanah La'ilan, and the first of Shvat, Rosh Hashanah for trees, according to Beit Shammai. Beit Hillel Omrim B'chamisha Asar Bo. Beit Hillel say that the Rosh Hashanah for trees is on the 15th of Shvat, which is, of course, Tu BiShvat. This was not a holiday, no big deal. This was a technical divider for the purpose of giving ma'asrot, of giving the tithe, you had to know which fruit belonged to which year. And the cutoff date following Beit Hillel was the 15th of Shvat, to BiShvat, which meant that fruits that chantu means became formed. It's hard to exactly define what that means, but that had the form of fruit after or before Tu BiShvat, that determined which year they would go for the tithe of that year. In other words, you could not use the fruits shechantu, which took form after Tu BiShvat, for the tithe of the previous year. That was the modest beginning of Tu BiShvat. Tu BiShvat really took off as a holiday under the Kabbalists of Tzfat, of Safed, the Ari, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and his students. This was explained at length in the Ari's student, whose name was Rabbi Natan Azati, Rabbi Nathan of Gaza, and he wrote a book called Chemdat HaYamim. And part of that book was then excerpted and published for the first time in Salonika in 1753. And that book is called Pri Eitz Hadar, which means literally the fruit of the goodly tree, which is normally a phrase used in connection with the Etrog on Sukkot. But Pri Eitz Hadar was the name of the booklet, including the Seder Tu BiShvat. I have here a Xerox of the first edition of Pri Eitz Hadar, Salonika 1753. And then it was reprinted innumerable times, and it became especially popular among Sephardic Jews. Sephardic Jews have a Seder Tu BiShvat. They drink 4 cups of wine, imitating the Pesach Seder, and I'm sure you can find examples of a Seder Tu BiShvat online, and I do a Seder Tu BiShvat every year, though it's very different from the one described by Rabbi Natan of Gaza. The third chapter in the history of Tu BiShvat was at the beginning of the 20th century. We already have mention of planting trees on Tu BiShvat in Russia. How exactly they did that in Minsk and Pinsk, I don't know. The ground is frozen at this time of year, but we have stories of Zionists going out to plant trees in 1906. In the land of Israel, in 1908, Histadrut HaMorim, the Union of Israeli Teachers, which still exists, decided that this shall be the annual day of tree planting for children. And by the time 1910 rolled around, in Hebrew Tafresh Ayin, there was already the young city of Tel Aviv, which had been founded in 1909. And in 1910, the children did not have to schlep off to Mikveh Yisrael, to the agricultural colony of Mikveh Yisrael, to plant trees. They planted trees in the city of Tel Aviv itself. A similar description of the tree planting by children in Tafresh Ayin Gimel 1913 at the town of Motza outside of Jerusalem. Whenever you drive on the main road to Tel Aviv, you pass by Motza. And then, of course, the holiday took off as a holiday for planting trees. But we're now at the fourth stage, or the fourth chapter of the history of Tu BiShvat. And Tu BiShvat has become a day on which we talk about ecology, the environment, or sustainability, depending on which decade. In the 70s, we called it ecology, then we called it the environment, and now we call it sustainability. And therefore, I decided that to celebrate Tu BiShvat with you this year, I would like to present 5 basic principles or ideas related to the environment in Judaism. They are taken from a responsive of mine, which you can read online. The English version appeared in this book, Response in a Moment, Volume 2. The Hebrew version in my book, Aseh L'charav Shelot Utshuvot. The specific question was, is it permissible to open a new phosphate quarry near Arad? And unfortunately, I don't have time to teach that part of the responsum. By the way, it's absolutely forbidden, even though the Israeli government in the end did it. But before I got to the phosphate quarry near Arad, I presented 5 basic concepts about the environment in Judaism, and I would like to share that with you at this time. So I'm going to pull up the screen. As an introduction, I quoted a cantata written by my father, Rabbi Noah Golinkin of blessed memory, called Shabbat and Ecology in the 1970s. And he wrote, I wanted to smell the fragrance of flowers, but all I smelled was the exhaust from cars. I wanted to see the sunset, all I saw was haze and smog. I wanted to see the flowing brook, all I saw was brown water, a floating can, the fish were dead. I wanted to see the mountain, but I saw the strip of a coal mine. In place of a sunrise, I saw the shape of modern high-rise apartments, and I could see the sun no more. My eyes, my ears, my nostrils, and my lungs were contaminated. My food was contaminated by civilization. Everything around me has changed. I don't recognize the environment, the beautiful things that God has created. If this was true in the early 1970s, Kal Vachomer, how much more so is it true today? And in this responsum published in 2008, I gave a number of specific examples. Unfortunately, the examples abound. I want to read you a recent article from 2019 from The Economist. One paragraph. 1 million species of animals and plants are threatened with extinction. 3/4 of the world's land and 2/3 of its marine environment have been significantly altered by human action. Urban areas have doubled in size in just the past 30 years. More than 85% of wetlands have been lost. More than 90% of ocean fish stocks are being harvested at or above sustainable levels. These are among claims made in a report published on May 6, 2019 by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity, etc., etc. Anybody who checks the internet can find more alarming statistics such as these. So I would like to present 3 basic principles of the Jewish view of ecology, and then 2, one practice, one minhag, and the other a halachic concept which has had a tremendous influence on Jewish law. The first basic principle regarding ecology is that our earth and the entire universe belong to God, which of course is contrary to the way many people in the world, both in the Western world and perhaps in the more primitive world, viewed the earth. The common conception was that this land is your land, this land is my land, that this land belongs to me, and that I can do whatever I want with my land that I purchased, and whether it's my backyard or my farm, and the idea that the land that I own, or the land on which my house is standing, or on which this building, the Schechter Institute, is standing, that this belongs to God, is a foreign concept to many modern people. And at that time, I wrote this past year as the sabbatical year. Well, this coming year in the land of Israel is going to be the sabbatical year starting on Rosh Hashanah. And the central verse about Shemitah, or the sabbatical year, is in Vayikra chapter 25. Ve'aretz lo timacher litzmitut ki li kol haaretz. But the land must not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. And in the Hebrew version of this responsum, I added an additional sentence from the Tractate of Sanhedrin, folio 39a. It's explaining Shemitah. It's explaining the sabbatical year. Ziru shesh ve'ashmitu sheva kidei shetedu she'aaretz shelihu. Plant for 6 years, have sabbatical on the 7th, in order that you should know that this land is mine. In other words, that passage in the Talmud is building on the sentence, ki li kol haaretz, right? For the land is mine, and saying that is exactly why we do the sabbatical year, to remind us once every 7 years that this land does not belong to us, but belongs to God. A similar idea appears in Psalm 24, and this is a very famous psalm, Lashem haaretz umlo'ah, which we recite at various times of the year, including the high holidays, Shalosh Regalim, Sundays. Adonai haaretz umlo'ah teveh v'yoshveva. The earth is the Lord and all that it holds, the world and its inhabitants. And there's a beautiful custom which I follow, which I learned about in the 1970s, is that when you buy a book You write inside the book, and you can see, if you can see behind me in my office, I'm surrounded by some 12,000 books. In every single book, I wrote the following. La Shema Aretzum Lo'ah, the earth is the Lord's and all that it holds. And if you'd like to return this book, you can return it to David Galinkin. A beautiful custom. The idea being that even though I now own these books, Ad Me'av Esrim, at some future point, my children, my grandchildren, the Schechter Institute Library is going to own these books. And I'm writing in every book that every single thing in the world really belongs to God, and we are just passing through. So just as the Shemitah year emphasizes this principle, Kili kol haaretz, for this land is mine, for the land is mine. So Psalm 24 says, the earth is the Lord and all that it holds, the world and its inhabitants. There is another beautiful psalm, which I'm not going to read with you, but you can all read it yourselves. If you'll open up any Tanakh to Psalm 104, which we recite, Baruchi Nafshi on Rosh Chodesh, the psalm for the day on Rosh Chodesh, is a beautiful celebration of God's creation in great detail. Now, there is one verse which would seem to take the opposite approach. That's a very famous verse, found in Genesis chapter 1. God says to Adam and Eve, Pru uravu umilu et haaretz v'chifshua uredu b'tgad hayam u'bof hashamayim u'v'chol chaya romeset al haaretz. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish and the sea, and the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth. This verse seems to give human beings carte blanche to subdue the universe. We can subdue the earth, we can rule over the fish in the sea, and the birds of the sky, and every living thing. And indeed, as Rabbi Robert Gordis points out in his article about the Jewish view of ecology, the traditional Christian interpretation was that this verse gives us the right to exploit nature. Subdue the earth, rule over the fish, the birds, and all living things. However, those Christian theologians failed to notice that in the very next verse, verse 29, it says that Adam and Eve may eat only plants and trees. Permission to eat meat is given only in Genesis chapter 9. In other words, if we really had the right to subdue everything, the fish and the birds and so on and so forth, then Adam and Eve would have been given permission to eat everything. But that is not the case. So what does v'chivshuha mean? What does to subdue the world mean? According to our sages, and you might not like this interpretation, but at least it saves the ecology or the environment. According to our sages in Yevamot, v'chivshuha comes to modify the first half of the verse. And the first half of the verse says, Peru uravu, right? Be fruitful and multiply. And since subduing enemies in war is primarily a male undertaking, the verb subdue teaches that the mitzvah of propagating the human race falls upon the male rather than upon the female. As according to the rabbis of the Talmud, men are required to fulfill the mitzvah of puravu because of the word v'chivshua and subdue it. Women are not required to fulfill the mitzvah of puravu. And in any case, in their reading, subdue it does not mean that we have the right to subdue the environment, to cut down all the trees in the Amazon, to kill all the lions in the world, and so on and so forth. According to Jewish law, in Yevamot and subsequent codes of Jewish law, we do not have the right to subdue the world in that fashion. So that is the first principle, that the world belongs to God, and we do not have the right to subdue every living creature. The second theological basis for ecology does not have a Hebrew term. The modern English term is stewardship. I just want to tell you what I called it in the Hebrew version of this responsum. So you should know that there is a Hebrew term in modern Hebrew. It's called hafkadah. And stewardship is found in Genesis chapter 2. The Lord took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till it and to guard it. In other words, God put us in the Garden of Eden not simply to have a good time, to enjoy the fruits of the Garden of Eden and to bask in the sun, but to till it and to guard it, to work the land and to protect the land. Or in modern English, we are stewards of the earth. Our job is to protect the earth, not simply to enjoy what's in the earth. And there's a famous midrash, which amazingly enough only appears in one place, in Kohelet Rabbah, which was edited in the land of Israel in the 6th century. And this is what this midrash says. When the Holy One, blessed be he, created Adam, he took him and made him pass before all the trees of the Garden of Eden. And he said to him, see my works, how lovely and how excellent they are. And everything that I have created for you I have created. Pay attention that you should not corrupt it. There was no one to fix it after you. If you remember what happened at Chernobyl some 20 years ago, and there have been similar nuclear accidents in other parts of the world, you understand exactly what this means. Pay attention that you should not corrupt it. There was no one to fix it after you. It's going to take hundreds of years for the land about Chernobyl to become normal land again that is not radioactive. And this midrash from the 6th century is saying that God says to Adam, here's a tour of Gan Eden, really lovely, beautiful, but your job is not to corrupt it. Your job is not to destroy it, because there is no one to fix it after you. The third reason for protecting the environment is not theological, but logical, simple common sense. And that is that a person who harms nature harms himself. And this idea appears in 2 rabbinic passages. And I really love this next passage from Bava Kama. I'm quoting from the Babylonian Talmud. There's a similar passage in the Tosefta. Our sages taught, a certain man was removing stones from his domain to the public domain. In other words, he was trying to get rid of the stones in his garden or his plot of land. He picks up the stones and he throws them in the street. When a chassid, a pious man, found him doing so and said to him, fool, the Hebrew term is much stronger. The Hebrew term says reka. Reka means empty head, a person with an empty head. Why do you remove stones from a domain that is not yours to a domain which is yours? Which seems totally illogical. He's saying you're throwing stones from a domain that is not yours, from your garden, into the street, which is yours. The man laughed at him. A while later, the man had to sell his field and was walking on the same public domain where he had put the stones. And he stumbled over the very same stones. He said to himself, the pious man was right when he said to me, why do you remove stones from a domain that is not yours to a domain which is yours? In other words, that man thought that his garden, his farm, was going to be his land for generations. And he's just dumping the stones in the public thoroughfare. But it turns out that he had to sell his land. It was no longer his land. And the public thoroughfare where he had thrown the stones, that was actually his land. And he tripped on the very same stones that he had thrown into Reshut Harabim, that he had thrown into the public thoroughfare. So the logic of this is very simple. When we dump our waste or our toxic waste in the public domain, we are the ones who are in the end going to suffer from the pollution that we spread. And a similar idea is expressed in a classic midrash, Vayikra Rabbah. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught, it can be compared to people who were in a boat, and one of them took a drill and began to drill under his seat. His fellow passengers said to him, why are you doing this? He said to them, what do you care? Am I not drilling under me? The hole is only under my seat. What do you care? They replied, because you are sinking the boat with us in it. The world is like one boat, not one global village, but one boat. If one passenger drills a hole under a seat, we all sink. And the same idea, amazingly enough, was expressed by Senator Adlai Stevenson, one of the founders of the United Nations. We travel together, passengers on a little spaceship, dependent on its vulnerable reserves of air and soil, all committed for our safety to its security and peace, preserved from annihilation only by the care, the work, and the love we give our fragile craft. So Adlai Stevenson in the 1950s or 60s expressed a similar idea to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the 2nd century, which is that we are all in the same boat traveling through space. If I drill a hole under my seat, we all sink. And now, with the few minutes I have left, I would like to point out 2 examples of environmental awareness in our tradition. The first is the idea of planting trees, which I already mentioned on BiShvat. I'm sure you've heard of the 5th Zionist Congress, the founding of the JNF, the Jewish National Fund. I know that we all buy tree certificates for children and grandchildren in honor of their bar or bat mitzvah. But this idea of planting trees did not start with the JNF. And it started in a number of rabbinic passages. I'll just give you one of them. It says in Deuteronomy 13:5, this is from Vayikra Rabbah again. After the Lord your God you shall walk. Is it possible for man of flesh and blood to walk after God? About God it says, Shehu Esh Ochlai is a consuming fire. Rather, in the beginning of creating the world, God's first action was to plant. As it is written, and the Lord God planted a tree, right? Vayita gan be'eden mikenim, or eitz. So too, when you enter the land of Israel, make the planting of trees your first order of business. As it says in Leviticus, Ki tavo el haaretz unetatem kol eitz ma'achal. When you come into the land, you shall plant fruit trees. So by planting trees, we are imitatio Dei. We are imitating God. Just as God planted trees in the Garden of Eden, we plant trees when we enter the land of Israel. And the last concept, unfortunately, I have to skip a really nice story there. The last concept is the concept of Baal Tashrit, or as they say in Ashkenazis, Baal Tashris. Until today, throughout the world, when a Jewish child is about to waste some food or throw some food in the garbage, his parent says to him, Baal Tashrit or Baal Tashris, which means you're not allowed to wantonly destroy food or anything else. And this is, of course, based on the famous verse in Deuteronomy chapter 20, when you besiege a city for a long time, making war against it, you shall not destroy Baal Tashrit, its trees, by wielding an axe against them. You may eat from them, but must not cut them down, for our trees of the field human beings, that they should be besieged by you. Only the fruit which you know are fruit-bearing, are not fruit-bearing, you may destroy, etc. In other words, you can destroy non-fruit trees in order to build the siege works. You may not destroy fruit trees, so says Deuteronomy chapter 20. However, the sages of the Talmud and Midrash expanded this prohibition, and we learn in Sifrei Dvarim in the Finkelstein edition that it comes to include diverting water from trees so that they should wither and die. Maimonides added, Hilchot Melachim, that the prohibition applies not just during a siege, but whenever a person cuts a fruit tree in a wanton fashion. He did not allow cutting down other rabbis, and in addition, the Rambam and others extended this not only to trees, but to other things as well. Whoever breaks vessels, or tears garments, or destroys a building, or clogs up a fountain, or does away with food in a destructive manner, violates the prohibition of Baal Tashrit. So we have seen here, in a bird's eye view, 5 basic concepts. Here, let me take this down. 5 basic concepts related to Judaism and the ecology or the environment. Number 1, Ladonai haaretz umlo'ah, the earth belongs to God and not to us. We do not have the right to destroy it. Number 2, stewardship, that God put us in the Garden of Eden and on this planet to till it and to guard it. We have to guard it. We may not destroy it. Number 3, the logic. If we throw our garbage in the public thoroughfare, we are actually throwing our garbage in our own thoroughfare, and we will eventually trip on our own garbage. Number 4, the positive value of planting trees, as we do in Israel today. Number 5, the negative mitzvah of Baal Tashrit. You may not wantonly destroy anything, whether it be food, garments, plastic, and everything else. And I think that with these 5 concepts in mind, they will help us not only on Tu BiShvat, but throughout the year as we struggle with the pollution and the environmental dangers which I described in my introduction. Unfortunately, our time is up, and I will now pass the wand, the baton, to our next teacher, who is Dr. Perry Sinclair, the new Mankalit, the new Scott and Susan Shea, Director General of the Tali Education Fund. She officially took over from Dr. Eitan Shikli on June 1st. Needless to say, it's been a rather boring and uneventful time in our lives. And our hats off to Perry for dealing with the pandemic as she leads the Tali educational system with 65,000 children in Israel. And her topic is, how great are your works, O Lord, Tu BiShvat at home with Tali.
Toda rabba. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. It's really quite exciting to end my day here in Modi'in with all of you. What I would like to share with you this evening is a new resource that we've just launched at Tali. It's a resource which is aimed at families, at parents and grandparents. It's to bring Jewish education back into the home to enhance what we do as parents. I think that the pandemic has reminded us all what an important role parents play in our children's education. And I'm very happy that we've been able to launch this new program. I'll say that it started with a whim before Shavuot, when we decided to very quickly put together collate materials for families surrounding Shavuot. And it was very well accepted, both English and Hebrew, which basically led to this new resource that I want to share with you today, At Home with Tali. And I will share it with you. What I'd like us to do is, first of all, I invite you all to open up your microphones. And if you're familiar with the Zoom reactions on the bottom of your screen, you can use them to raise your hand if you'd like to. You can use them to raise your hand if you'd like to contribute to the conversation, if you'd like to ask anything or comment or heckle. That all works. So I'll walk you through At Home with Tali, and then we'll study a short text together. At Home with Tali, like I said, is aimed at bringing Jewish education back home. And what we've decided to do is provide once a month this resource, which comes in a digital format, but can also be downloaded as a PDF and printed. I'm just trying to get all my technology up and working so we could enjoy it together. And it is not working. There we go. So you could receive the resource in digital format, or you could choose to print it out and use with your families on a hard copy. The idea every month is to suggest a topic for consideration at home that relates to the various festivals or days that we celebrate in the Jewish calendar that month, but from a new or maybe less traditional perspective. So, for example, the month of Shvat, in which we celebrate Tu BiShvat, and at the end of the month in Israel, we have what's called Yom HaMishpacha, the Family Day. We took both those topics and we decided to focus on connections, on kesher, connections, and bring that to life. The idea in dealing with connections is taking ideas such as those David spoke about, Lincoln spoke about in his lecture, like protecting the environment, working and honoring the land, biodiversity, that we talk about and that are prevalent in the news, and look at them from a Jewish perspective and offer different prisms from which families can delve into these big questions. It's not a resource that needs to be used from cover to cover, but more a collection of ideas, video clips, music, text study, different activities and puzzles, and you could pick and choose the things that are more appropriate for your family, for your children, for your community. So each edition will have various entry points into the main topic, into connections, as it were, with the month of Shvat. And then delve into that. So as you can see here, one of the topics is working and protecting the land. Rabbi Galinkin spoke about that. The second is biodiversity, which I think is actually very important in this pandemic. I think for our own personal well-being and for the social and emotional development of our children, it's important, even in difficult times, or especially in difficult times, to be able to lift our head up, look around us, and see the positive things that are coexisting with all the turmoil and trouble and pain that we're living through. Biomimicry is a topic which talks about how we look at nature and are inspired by nature, how many creations and inventions engineered looking at nature. Family connections in this edition talks about Birkat habanim v'habanot, the blessing of the children, and introduces the traditional text along with musical renditions of it, as well as inviting families to create their own blessings that they might share with their family, with their children, or have the children bless the elders, the parents and grandparents on a weekly basis. And then we have the Hebrew corner, which takes the word kesher, or connection, and looks at different derivations of the word and how this one root, kuf shin resh, is used in multiple ways in the Hebrew language. Of course, at the end, there's a brain teaser, and families are invited to try and tackle it, send in a picture, and our team will select a winner at the end of the month. The text I thought we would share is one that Rabbi Galinkin actually jumped over very quickly. So, oh, can you hear me? I seem to be losing my internet connection. Can you hear me, Moria? Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. The text I'd like to offer is from Psalm 104, verse 24. Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam bechokma asita. Or in English, I am losing my Zoom connection.
Yeah, there's no text yet.
There is no text and I'm losing my Zoom. Wait a minute. Rega. Okay, if I get disconnected, I'm going to reconnect immediately. So hold that thought.
You sound great.
Yeah, the sound is fine.
You're okay.
My screen just froze. Okay, I can't see
Perry,
you.
if
We
there's no
hear
text,
you. We hear you.
You'll just tell us the text in Hebrew.
Excellent. Okay, I'm back. Okay, have no fear. So the text is, Marabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chokhma asita. How great are your works, O Lord? You've made them all in wisdom. I think these days, with the pandemic and the pain and the suffering and all the ramifications we really aren't totally aware of yet.
Well, I guess she'll come back in a minute.
Oh, yeah.
Now we really lost her.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure she'll be back soon. So while we're waiting for Perry to come back, I'll tell you the story that I skipped from the Midrash, which you may know, in relation to tree planting. It's a beautiful story. It exists in a number of places in rabbinic literature. The Emperor Hadrian, who many Jews say Yimach Shmo, may his name be erased, he was the emperor who put down the Bar Kokhba revolt. And apparently the Emperor Hadrian actually visited the land of Israel around the year 132 of the Common Era. And the story goes in the Midrash that he saw an old man planting a fig tree. And he says to him, "Why are you planting a fig tree? You're never going to eat the fruits of this fig tree. By the time this tree..."
It was a carob, not a fig.
What?
It was a carob, not a fig.
Well, there are a number of versions of the story.
Oh, well, figs are very quick to make fruit. So it doesn't make sense. Carob takes 70 years.
We'll use a carob. So the emperor says, "Why are you planting the tree? You're an old man." And the old man says, "If I will live to eat the fruit, fine. If my children and grandchildren will live to eat the fruit, also fine. Just as I found the world full of trees, full of fruits, so may my children and grandchildren find the world full of trees and fruits." I just filled in a story that we skipped before while we were waiting for you to come back, Barry.
Excellent. Kicked out of my own Zoom.
A space filler.
Okay, toda rabba. I think it's a really important message to be able to say how wonderful creation is. And I know this is something that we've tried to do as parents. My kids aren't that young anymore, and I've definitely endured lots of eye rolling over this. But I think the idea of radical amazement that we learn from Rabbi Heschel and Marabu Masecha that we learn from this psalm are very, very powerful and very important in these times. And I want to take a closer look at a few of the verses from this psalm with you, and maybe think about them and think about our conception of creation and our knowledge of the creation stories, and try and answer the question I will pose, which is, what does the psalmist read? What does whoever wrote this psalm mean when he says kulam b'chokhma asita? What does he mean that it was all created in wisdom? That's my question. And here are a few verses from the psalm. If anyone would like to read them, I'd love for this to be a more participatory session and wake everyone up. Would someone like to read it?
I'll try.
Meule. Great, thank you.
המשלח מעיינים בנחלים בין הרים יהלכון. ישקו כל היתו שדי, ישברו פרעים צמאם, עליהם עוף השמיים, ישכון מבין אפאים, יתנו קול. משקה הרים מעליותיו, מפרים מעשיך תשבע הארץ. מצמיח חציר לבהמה, והסב לעבודת האדם, להוציא לחם מן הארץ.
Great, thank you very much. Would someone like to read the English? Michelle Koch on the Hebrew.
I'll read it. Nobody
Great,
else.
thanks.
Okay. You make springs gush forth in torrents. They make their way between the hills, giving drink to all the wild beasts. The wild asses slake their thirst. The birds of the sky dwell beside them and sing among the foliage. You water the mountains from your lofts. The earth is sated from the fruit of your work. You make the grass grow for the cattle and herbage for man's labor, that he may get food out of the earth.
Great, thank you very much. Does anyone want to comment about these verses? What story they tell? Does it remind you of the story of creation from Bereshit? Is it telling a different story? In the reactions on the bottom, there's a possibility of raising your hand if you'd like, right?
What strikes me is the dominance of the water concept.
Okay. right? In Bereshit, water appears on the second day, right? Maim elyonim and maim tachtonim, and then creation moves on. Yofi, what else?
I think, Perry, what's interesting is it sounds like here the entire purpose of creation is to feed the animals and human beings. It's one huge engine that's feeding us.
Right, it's different elements that feed into each other that
and watering
kind of provide for each other.
Isn't the Torah also compared to water?
נכון, תורה נמשלה למים. Nice, I didn't think of that. Yes. Okay, so when you read, every time you read water here, could you substitute the water for Torah? I'll tell you what it reminds me of. I'm going to show you another picture. It reminds me of this. Do y'all recognize that?
Yep.
Okay. Do you remember the first scene in the
famous Jewish text?
Famous Jewish text. It's really it's profoundly connected to Psalm 104. What happened? The beginning. Do you remember the opening scene of this film? And I'm going to take us back to the text. Come on, you must have watched it numerous times.
The circle of life. The circle of life.
The circle of life.
I'm talking to the computer.
Someone else started to say something?
I said they're naming the baby.
Right, at the beginning of the movie, they name the baby. The picture from the trailer is actually taken from the scene where Mufasa, the king, takes Simba, his son, right, over Pride Rock, and he shows him his kingdom, his future kingdom, right? And he tells him that although they might be king of the beast, that one day he Mufasa too, he will die and his body will decompose and it'll feed the land, and the land will then grow grass, and the grass will feed the zebras, which then will be hunted down by the lions. He tells Simba about the circle of life. He basically draws the picture that we read about in Psalm 104, right? The springs enable the wild, make their way between the hills, and they give drink to the wild beasts, and the wild beasts quench their thirst, and the birds and the water, the mountain enables the earth to grow fruit, and man cuts the grass, right? The whole circle of life from the Lion King is depicted here in this psalm. This is obviously only 4 verses from the psalm, or vice versa. This psalm is then brought to life by the Lion King. So then I ask, I'll say one more thing. As opposed to the story of creation, the story of creation is sequential, right? First, the heavens and the earth are separated, and then earth grows foliage and trees, and then the stars and the sun and the moon are invented, and then the animals are created, and at the very end, man is created and brought into the world as the crown jewel of creation. In this depiction, right, everything is basically created in order for man to labor the land. But if you take the metaphor from the Lion King, the man toils the land, and beasts eat, and he eats, and they die, and this whole circle of life, basically the story of creation doesn't culminate in the creation of man in this depiction, but rather man has to toil the earth, and the earth provides for man. And I want to suggest that is the wisdom. The wisdom is in the harmony of creation, how all the elements come together to sustain each other, to enable growth, to enable sustenance, to enable existence of life on earth. And that I have shown you. So, wait a minute, let me stop this. That is an example of some of the text study that we bring in At Home with Tali, which actually appears in Hebrew as well. In Hebrew, we called it Tali Benale Bait, Tali in Slippers. And we're really hoping for this to be a resource used by families across the world. Before I share another tidbit from this resource. Does anyone want to comment, ask a question, react, say anything, share something? Now would be the time.
What I found interesting, the concept of nature kind of relates to, we always think about it as spontaneous, disorganized thing. And the quote you mentioned stresses the organized interdependence of all the elements, which is a very strong element.
Very nice. Very nice. I think, again, if we go back to our own well-being and to helping ourselves and our loved ones through this time, you know, there are positive messages that we could point to during a pandemic as well. All scientists coming together to look for a cure, and people reaching out to help those in need. It's very easy to find the negative aspects of this time that we're living through, but I think it's very important, and it actually is imperative to point to the positive aspects and to places where they and we can impact our own lives and lives in our community. So I think that's an important thing to stress as well.
Could I ask a further question?
Sure. I'm trying to see you on my screen.
Considering that nature is omnipresent, why aren't these particular prayers or psalms, including the one that Rabbi Golinkin was talking about, Rosh Chodesh, why aren't they recited every day?
What is the presumption here? If something is important, we have to recite it every day. Maybe we have to preserve it to an important moment like Rosh Chodesh.
Right. I think if you read Psalm 104 with Rosh Chodesh in mind, you'll see why they chose it for Rosh Chodesh.
I think tradition gives us lots of different opportunities to remember creation and to praise the workings of the world and appreciate nature and appreciate what we have and appreciate living creatures around us. I don't think we need one particular psalm. I think it's good that we have a rhythm of certain things that occur in different points during the Jewish year, during the Jewish day. I think also, you know, we have the liberty to create moments of awe and to mark them as individuals and as families and educators. I think we have a wonderful resource. We have, you know, the entire scripture and rabbinic literature and so much wealth within our tradition, so many lovely minhagim and customs. And I think we could find ways to highlight this all in our lives.
I wanted to give some kind of a response to this gentleman who's asking, why don't we do the 104 every day? Actually, you know, you have a certain number of prayers every day. You can add whatever you want. You can use other things to add to them. And if that prayer is very important to you and you feel very close to it, there is no one that can tell you not to add it.
That's an interesting thought, but I thought you are not supposed to add anything that you select to the code of prayers.
Prayers, I don't know if you're correct. I think that there is something to say about taking away. A prayer, the code of prayer is something that has been evolved through the generations. It was never some kind of a code from the Torah. It's something that evolved. And even today, you can see the different congregations or different movements change the code of prayer in some ways, take something away, put something in, add words, whatever.
Right.
So I don't think that the rabbi can answer that, but much better than I can.
I'll just answer in 30 seconds because I want to leave Perry her time. But you can say you can recite Psalms whenever you want. Some Jews recite the entire book of Psalms every week. Some people recite it in a day. You can always recite a chapter of Psalms whenever you want. And in addition, there are places in the service where you can add your personal prayers. At the end of the Amida, we recite Elohai Netzor in all Sidurim, but in the Talmud, that was a place where everyone recited their personal prayer.
So I would, sorry. I would suggest something else. I want to suggest that we use this wealth and this is our cultural literacy, and we use this language that we read in the Psalms. You don't need to recite the entire Psalm, but if we assimilate some of this language into our life, then when you see a beautiful sight, you could recite a blessing because we have blessings in tradition. You can also look at it and say, oh my God, that's a marabu moment. And I think that's very powerful. I think that's one of the messages. I worked at Kamperman in the Berkshires for many summers, and Rabbi Joshua Shavsky put that verse to music, and it was like one of the highlights of Shirah, of the kids singing, and it became part of the vocabulary to speak of these marabu moments. I think that's amazing, right? I think
like that.
If I could just say one thing that comes to mind is the Birkot Nehanin and Shakol Nia Bidvaro that we say every day for almost anything that we are about to consume. So I think that we're constantly adding to our tefillot and to our bakashot, to everything.
I think most of the students that Tali caters to, most of the families that Tali education caters to, aren't part of praying communities. They're not. These aren't families that daven 3 times a day. These aren't necessarily families that daven once a week in synagogue. I think that's roughly good that basically describes most of the Jewish world. And I think that if we can ingrain in them Jewish concepts, and we can talk about taking care of the environment from a Jewish perspective, and use our own tradition as our vocabulary, I think that's very powerful, and that'll strengthen the next generation's Jewish identity. I think that's the overall goal of Tali education. And if we can provide these little bite-sized texts and bring them into the home, they're not intimidating. You don't need a doctorate or a master's in order to read them. They're very easy to chew as a family. They're very easy to discuss, and we can assimilate them into our identity. I think that would be very very beneficial. I think that would be a really strong message, and I really invite you to use this resource. I invite you to share the resource. It's accessible from the Schechter website. It's accessible from the
Moria put it on the chat. It's in the chat. You can link.
It's in the chat. It shouldn't be considered a burden. It's not a chovah. You don't have to use it all. You can really just pick and choose from it. If these messages that we put out there can reach wide and far within the Jewish world, I think that would be a great thing. I was going to share with you the Keshel, the Hebrew vocabulary bit of the resource, but I have run out of time. So I invite you to go in there and see different conjugations of the word kesher and what they mean in modern Hebrew. And I will share the final screen that I have been asked to share with you. If you're enjoying this, oh, wait a minute, what have I done? If you're enjoying zooming into BiShvat with us, then I invite you all to join our mailing list, the Schechter mailing list. As Rabbi Galinkin said, we've done this 3 times now. So it looks like this is turning into a kavua, a reoccurring tradition from the Schechter Institute. And right after me, I am very happy to introduce to you Dr. Gila Wachman, who is specializes in Midrash and Agadah. She teaches at the Schechter Institute in the MA program, as well as in the rabbinical program. Dr. Gila Wachman also teaches our principals and teachers in the Tali Halili program, and you're in for a treat. So have a great week ahead. I wish everyone health, take care, get vaccinated when you can, and we'll see you soon.
Toda rabba, Perry.
Toda rabba, Perry. Thank you very much. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. So Tu BiShvat is known as Rosh Hashanah Leilanot, the new year for the trees. And so I would like to talk about some trees in the Bible and in the Midrash. Well, the Bible is full of various trees, fruit trees and idol trees used for building or firewood, yeah, as an object of worship or just as a metaphor. But this lesson will focus on 3 biblical trees. The first is the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. The second is the tree upon which Haman was hanged. In Hebrew, we use the same word, etz, both for the tree as well as for the wood which the gallows was made. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And the third is a less known tree, the one that Moshe threw into the bitter water of Marah in order to sweeten it. So at first sight, and maybe I should have shared the screen so you can see the beautiful PowerPoint thing I did here. Yeah, so at first sight, it seems that there's nothing in common between these 3 trees. But reviewing the Midrashim about these verses reveals a surprising connection. In all 3 cases, the Bible does not tell us exactly what tree it was, and our sages in the Midrash try to identify it. Why is it so important to identify these trees, and what are their conclusions? So these questions we will try to answer in this lesson. We'll start with the first tree that appears right in the beginning in the creation story of chapter 2. So we all know, I think Rabbi Golinkin discussed that also, that the first thing God did according to the second creation story is he created man, and immediately afterwards plants a garden in Eden, and there he puts the man that he created to work, to Ovda Uleshomra, right? So the first commandment that man receives, in fact, the first words spoken between God and man, is the prohibition against eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. As it is well known, Adam and Eve did not keep this commandment, and the Midrash goes and asks, I didn't read the verses, but I'm sure that you know the verses, right? Vayita Adonai Elohim gan be'eden mikedem, vayasem sham et ha'adam asher yatzar. Vayatzmach Adonai Elohim min ha'adama kol etz nechmad lemar'eh, v'tov lema'achal, ve'etz ha'chaim betoch hagan, ve'etz hada'at tov v'ra. So the last words, the tree of knowledge of good and bad, this is what we are going to focus at. So when we look at the Midrash, Bereshit Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah, about this verse, the Midrash asks, what was the tree from which Adam and Eve ate? Now, we find here several answers. I can make it larger if it would be easier to read. No, I did not mean to move it. Just make it larger. I hope everybody can see.
Yes, please do.
And if not, I'll just, you'll have to trust me when I read it. So the question is, what was the tree from which Adam and Eve ate? Now, the Midrash gives us several answers to this question. And the first one is somewhat surprising. Rabbi Meir said, it was wheat. For when a person lacks knowledge, people say that man has never eaten bread of wheat. Okay, so the first answer to these questions, I'm quite sure if I would ask any of you, what was that tree? I believe no one would say wheat for several reasons. Okay, so why did Rabbi Meir suggest this? I think Rabbi Meir is pointing at a connection between eating wheat or bread and having knowledge, a sort of a very basic knowledge that every child gets at some point after giving up nursing and starting to eat real food. So this is a very basic idea of knowledge. And yet this is a strange answer. Not only us, even the sages themselves were surprised by this answer, because immediately after Rabbi Meir, the Tana, the sage of the Mishnah, we find some kind of a discussion by the Amoraim, the sages of the Talmud and the Midrash, and they try to clarify this matter. So Rabbi Shmuel ben Yitzchak asked Rabbi Zeira, is it possible that it was wheat? Yes, he said, but surely tree is written. It says tree of knowledge, not the grass of knowledge. So how could it be? It grew lawfully like the cedars of the Lebanon, he replied. Okay, so this, we actually have two kinds of plants in this one answer, because it's wheat, but it is also tall as a cedar tree. So this is some miraculous kind of wheat, not something that we know, but you know, in the Garden of Eden, we could find probably plants that we do not know anymore. We don't have them in our real world. So this is the first answer. The second answer is given by Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda ben Eli said it was grapes. For it says, their grapes are grapes of poison. They have clusters of bitterness. This is from Shirat HaAzinu in Sefer Dvarim. So those clusters brought bitterness into the world. Now, this answer makes more sense because grapes are indeed more likely to be called tree. And also when we think of the symbolic meaning of this plant, right, we make wine out of grapes, we can easily understand why Rabbi Yehuda chose it. He's probably thinking of the bad things that wine can cause, like the sin that could be caused by wine. The third answer is that of Rabbi Abba of Akko, and he says it was etrog, as it is written, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, so he is trying to make it clear using the exact words that the book tells us. Consider, go forth and see what tree is it whose wood, etz, can be eaten just like its fruit, and you find none but the etrog. This is a midrash that Chazal also use when they talk about the mitzvah of Sukkot, of the four species, the four minim. So they say etrog is a kind of fruit that tastes, the fruit tastes just like the tree, the branch. I've never tasted either, so I don't know if it's true, but I believe them when they say so. And they use this midrash here too to describe how do we know that this was etrog, because it says what we saw in the verse. No, we didn't see it in the verse because I didn't bring you the verses, but it says Vatere ha'isha kitov, right? And kitov ha'etz lema'achal. The tree is good for eating, so therefore this was etrog. That's what Rabbi Abba says. It's a kind of a very Talmudic way of thinking when we look at it. So what we see, in any case, we just moved from regarding the tree of knowledge as one of the 7 species, right? We saw wheat and grapes. Then we moved now from Shiv'at HaMinim to the 4 species, right? Of Sukkot, instead of those of Bikurim. So either way, whether it's connected, whether it's one of the 4 species or one of the 7 species, we're still talking about plants that are connected with the land of Israel and of the Jewish practice, either from the first fruit or Sukkot. Now comes a different answer, and this is the answer of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yosef said, they were figs. One learns the obscure from the explicit, and a statement from its context. Thus, this may be compared, before that. So what Rabbi Yosef says is that we know, I was asked to make it larger. I don't know if it makes things better for everybody. So if we say that the fruit, the tree of...
It was larger before, Gila.
It was?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll change it anyway. I hope I can. See, that's why I didn't do it in the first place. Now how I get out of it. Okay, I'll keep
better.
I'll keep it this way. Okay. So Rabbi Yosef says that the tree of knowledge was figs, which really makes sense because actually that's the only name, the only tree that is mentioned in the story is the fig tree, of which Adam and Chava made their covered themselves with the leaves. And we should notice, of course, that the fig tree is also one of the 7 species, which I mentioned before, Shiv'at Haminim. But what Rabbi Yosef also does, or maybe not him, maybe the Midrash, but it gives us a nice parable to explain why would the fig be one of these options, or why would the fig be the answer to our question. So this may be compared to a royal prince who sinned with a slave girl, and the king, on learning of it, expelled him from court. He went from door to door of the slaves, but they would not receive him. But she who had sinned with him opened her door and received him. So we can easily understand what this parable means. But Rabbi Yosef also explains, but because he had eaten of its fruit, the fig tree opened its doors and received him, as it is written, and they sewed fig leaves together. So we have here an explanation, probably the best of all of them, although I don't remember seeing the tree of knowledge described as a fig tree. We all know as an apple tree, but I'm not going to go into that thing. Well, that came quite later after this Midrash. I believe it came from the Christianity art. In any case, this is not the last question, the last answer to our question. There's another answer. But we should notice something strange about this parable, because it changes the order of the way things happen. In the parable, the sinner, right, the prince, was first expelled and only then found the open door of the fig tree of the slave, which is not quite the way the story we had the story in Bereshit. Also, we should notice that this specific story is trying to hint us to what kind of a sin we are talking about. The prince who sinned with the female slave I don't think it's an accidental or random story. And we should also have in mind that our sages used the different stages of a fig fruit as metaphors of the stage of feminine puberty. So it seems that a connection is made here between the tree of knowledge and other biblical meaning of the verb to know, as in Adam knew his wife Eve. And if this sounds a bit too Christian to you, perhaps that is why the Midrash goes on and brings a 5th opinion. And this opinion is brought to us by Rabbi Azariah and Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Simon in the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. And what he said is, heaven forbid that we should guess what tree it was. The Holy One did not and will not reveal to man what the tree was. So after giving all these nice answers, wheat, grapes, etrog, and fig. The fifth answer is that we should not even try to answer this question. The Midrash concludes with the understanding that this question should stay unanswered, that it is a secret, something that is better left unspoken. It was a unique tree, not one of those that we know today. So this is the first case here. We asked the question, what tree was it? And we finally find ourselves without an answer, or we should not have an answer to this question. I would like to now move to the other side of the Tanakh, where we find another tree, the one that Haman planned to hang Mordechai on, but eventually was hanged on it himself. Of course, it doesn't have to be a tree, though you can see here in the picture from the Frankfurt Machzor, I think from the 15th century, if I'm not mistaken. So sometimes the Jewish artists did draw it as a tree, but again, this comes from the Hebrew word for tree, which is etz, and it's the same word for wood, the product that we have from the tree. So the sages use this double meaning of the word etz to create a midrash, which again starts with a question. But first, we will read the verses that this midrash refers to. So this is from Megillat Esther, chapter 5, verse 14. ותאמר לו זרש אשתו וכל אוהביו, יעשו עץ גבוה 50 אמה. Well, you can see יעשו עץ obviously means that it's not a plant, but still the Midrash insists of treating it as a kind of tree. ובבוקר אמור למלך ויתלו את מרדכי עליו, ובו עם המלך אל המשתה שמח, ויטב הדבר לפני המן, ויעש העץ. So this proposal pleased Haman, and he had the stake put on. Now the Midrash starts with a very similar question. This is a lot of text, so I hope we can be able to see it. This comes from the Midrash Esther Rabbah, Parasha Tet 9. And the Midrash asks, what kind of tree was the stake made of? Or in Hebrew, מאיזה עצים היה אותו העץ. Here you see the double meaning of the word etz. Okay, so it starts with the question, and then our sages said, when he came to make it, God called all the trees of creation and said, which will offer itself for this wicked to be hanged on? Notice the word trees of creation, which sends us back to what we started with, the story of Bereshit, as if to say, from the beginning, God planned a tree to be created in order to hang Haman on it. So here the trees become part of the story. It's not only we try to identify, but we see that the trees actually take part in the story. The first one is the fig. The fig tree said, I will offer myself, for from me Israel brings first fruit. And what is more, Israel is compared to me, as it is written, like the first fig to ripen on a fig tree. This is from Hosea, Kevakura. So Israel is compared to a fig, and that's why it's very appropriate, says the fig, that I will give myself to hang Haman Harasha, the enemy, on me. And then the grapevine says, I offer myself, for Israel is compared to me. As it is written, you caused grapevine to journey out of Egypt. Gefen mimitzrayim tasia. That's a famous verse from Tehillim, from the Psalms. And then we'll do it kind of fast because it's a very long list here. The pomegranate says, I offer myself, for Israel is compared to me. And there's a verse from Shir HaShirim. And the nut tree says, I offer myself, for Israel it's compared to me. Another verse from Shir HaShirim. And the etrog says, see, we already have three trees that were referred to in the first midrash. The etrog said, I offer myself because Israel takes me to perform a mitzvah. And so the myrtle, the hadass, also says, I offer myself because Israel is compared to me. And then the olive says, and then the apple says, and then the palm tree says, and then there are the acacia trees and fir trees that they offer themselves. They don't have a verse, but the tabernacle and the temple were built from these trees. And then there's the cedar tree, which we also saw before, because of the verse Tzadik katamar ifrach ke'erez balevanon isgeh, right? The righteous bloom like date palm and they thrive like cedar of Lebanon. And the willow said, I offer myself, for Israel is compared to me. And also they take for a mitzvah of the 4 species. So we have a very long list here, and you will probably not be surprised to notice how many trees are mentioned here, or how many trees speak here. If we count the acacia and fir as one, because they only have one saying, then anybody?
10 or 13.
Aha. So let's see, there's a fig, a grapevine, a pomegranate, a nut, an etrog, a myrtle, an olive, an apple, a palm, the building trees, the cedar, and the willow. Altogether, we have 12 trees. Not very surprising, because what we see here is really like a gathering of all kinds of trees that are supposed to remind us of the tribes of Israel, right? Together. It's all also might remind us of a very famous story, Yotam's parable in the book of Judges, where also there's a question, and only there every one of the trees does not want to be the one chosen. So if we have the parable of Yotam in mind, we probably know how this story is going to end. It ends with a thorn. Okay, so at the end, after all these 12 tribes, 12 trees that are all compared to Israel and therefore kind of represent Israel in all kinds of ways, then comes the thorn and says to God, Master of the universe, I who have no reason to exist, offer myself to have this impure one hang from me. For I am called by the name thorn, and since he is a painful thorn, it is fitting that a thorn be hanged on a thorn. And so it was made of it. So eventually, Haman, according to this midrash, was hanged not on a tree, but on a thorn. And actually, if we look again at that picture that I had here before, you can see that it is some kind of a thorn, probably. You can see the parts that are, sharp over there. I think, I'm not sure. Maybe it's a kind of tree anyway.
If you're looking at the bashal, at the atad, because you're talking about the atad. Atad is also a kind of a tree because it's a thorn tree.
It's a thorn bush, I believe.
It's
right?
a thorn bush, but it can be like a fairly large tree. So it could very well be that it was the atad, the actual thorn tree.
It might be, although the Hebrew here doesn't say atad, it says kotz.
Yeah.
And I think this is important because this is not the only place where Haman is compared to a thorn. This is actually a very common midrashic notion. For example, in the Babylonian Talmud in Masechet Megillah, there's a midrash about the verse Tachat ha'na'atzutz ya'ale brosh v'tachat ha'sirpad ya'ale hadas. Na'atzutz is probably a kind of a thorn, of course. And also one might be familiar with the famous piyut Atz kotzetz ben kotzetz ktutzai lekatzetz. This is often brought as an example for the impossible tongue twisters of the Piyut language, but really the words atz kotzetz refer to Haman as a kotz. Okay, so the idea that Haman is like a thorn, a kotz, and the idea that Am Yisrael is like all these trees, fruit trees, is a well-known idea. Only here the Midrash brings these two ideas together and describes the tree on which Haman was hanged. Okay, so the third, I'm really out of time now. I should be doing it faster now. The third tree, and I think the most relevant for today, is the one that Moshe threw into the water in order to make them sweet. So this is from Shmot Tetvav, which is actually Parashat Beshalach. This week's portion is always read on the Shabbat close to BiShvat. How appropriate. So right after the crossing of the Red Sea, Bnei Israel find themselves without water. And when they finally get to the water in Marah, they are bitter water, they cannot drink them. So Hashem says to Moshe that he should throw a tree into the water. And now the Midrash does not ask the question, but we can see from the Midrash that it deals with the question, what was this tree? So I'm reading from the Midrash of the Tanaim, Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael, the Midrash to the book of Shmot. And the Lord showed him a tree. Rabbi Yoshua says it was a willow tree. Rabbi Elazar of Modi'in says it was an olive tree, though you can hardly find anything more bitter than the olive. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha says it was an ivy. So all these identifications say that it was a very bitter tree, and that makes it even a bigger miracle, right? Because if you sweeten something by a bitter tree, then it's even a bigger miracle. By Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha, it's even bigger because it's a poisonous tree. And then comes a different answer. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, he showed him a teaching of the Torah, for it really says, and the Lord taught him, Vayorehu, right? The Pasuk says, Vayorehu Adonai Etz, not he showed him, but he taught him. Just as in the passage, and he taught me, Vayoreni, and said unto me. Okay, and there's another, all kinds of other answers. Rabbi Natan says it was a cedar, and some say it was a root of fig tree and the root of a pomegranate tree. You see, Chazal keep using the same trees. Those are the trees they know from their close area. But the last answer here, the allegoristic, Dorshei Rashumot, say, he showed him words of the Torah, which is likened to a tree. As it is said, she is a tree of life. Etz chayim hi lamachazikim ba. We all know that verse. So what we see here is, again, a list of trees, but at the end, the final answer is none of them are really the right answer, but we should think not of a real tree, but as the Torah, which is compared to a tree. In other words, what Moshe used to sweeten the water was really the words of the Torah. So in all three midrashim, it is quite clear that the question, which tree was it? This question does not derive from pure botanic curiosity, but from the motivation of sages to understand what the Torah is teaching us. Behind the question, what was the tree from which Adam and Eve ate, hides the question, what was really the original sin? Behind the question, what kind of tree was the stake of Haman made of, hides the will to praise the people of Israel and condemn its enemy, Haman. And behind the mystery of the sweetening tree stands the interpretation connecting both water and trees with the learning of the Torah. I would now like to invite or introduce the next speaker, who is Romina Racine. She's the director of Neve Shechter. and I'm very proud to work with her in Neve Shechter in our Beit Midrash. She would talk about the landscapes of Tel Aviv, the photography exhibits of children from special ed schools at Neve Shechter.
Toda rabba, Gila.
Toda.
Thank you. Toda, Gila. Hello. Okay. I'm Romina Racine. I'm very happy to be with you all here tonight. I'm the director of Neve Shechter, a center for contemporary Jewish culture and arts here in Tel Aviv. And tonight I'd like to speak with you about the landscapes of this city. And would like to invite you to add to your Zoom name your favorite landscape or spot in Tel Aviv. You just have to do a right click on the screen, or, well, I can do it now with a right click, but up in the right corner, there are 3 little dots. If you go there, you just go to the rename function, and you can just add your favorite spot or landscape in Tel Aviv. Let's see what you wrote. I'm not sure if all of you visited Tel Aviv, but what I'm sure is due to all these restrictions, many of you haven't been able to get here this year. So I just wanted to help you imagine and remember the great spots that we have in Tel Aviv. Maybe you wrote Gan HaAtzmaut, thank you, or I can't read most of your names, but I'm sure some of you guys wrote the beach, the Tayelet, Park Yarkon, the Rothschild Boulevard. I wrote Neve Tzedek. Neve Tzedek is this beautiful neighborhood that I really like, and that Neve Shechter is located in. So it's not only a very special and beautiful place, but also it has a very interesting name. It means abode of justice or oasis of justice. And the name appears actually in the book of Jeremiah. And it's a neighborhood located in southwestern Tel Aviv. And it was the first Jewish neighborhood to be built outside the old city of Jaffa, decades before even Tel Aviv was founded in 1909. Originally, it was a Mizrahi and Yemenite Jewish neighborhood. And for years, it prospered as Tel Aviv grew up around it. And, but years of neglect and disrepair followed. But since the early 80s, Neve Tzedek has become one of Tel Aviv's latest fashionable and expensive districts with a village-like atmosphere. I'd like to show you some pictures that might help you remember our city and our landscapes. Of course, the Mediterranean Sea, This is our neighborhood, Neve Tzedek. This is really very close to Neve Shechter. And these pictures are parts of the project I wanted to share with you all. It's a project that documents the urban landscape of Neve Tzedek, and it takes place every year on BiShvat at Neve Shechter. 6 years ago, in order to celebrate this holiday in an artistic and cultural form, Rabbi Arbiv from the conservative congregation of Neve Tzedek and Neve Shechter partnered with 2 local organizations in our neighborhood. The community center run by the city and Idoni Neve Tzedek, which is a local high school for students with learning disabilities. This is a very special school that brings together Jewish, Muslim, and Christian kids, children from migrant workers and asylum seekers, and they are mainly kids with social and emotional challenges. And they find in this school a new home and a new hope. This project, led by Neve Shechter, has led them to feel part of the neighborhood and strengthen their sense of belonging to the city. The artistic creation through the camera allows them to develop their observation skills, their confidence, and their ways of expression. So I just wanted to share that in the first meeting 6 years ago, Rabbi Arbiv taught to the first group of neighbors and students of this high school the following text that maybe most of you know from the morning prayer, Yotzer Or, Mechadesh bechol yom tamid ma'aseh bereshit. Renews every day, constantly, the act of creation. This text, I really love this prayer and this idea that God created the world one time 5,781 years ago, but actually he also recreates his world and renews it every single day. And I think it's an idea that brings so much hope and strength and beauty and faith to ones that think of it and say it. So with that idea in mind, the first group went on to a photography tour of the neighborhood led by Sharon Agai, who is a local photographer, and they tried to find how creation gets renewed every morning, also in our city. Since that first encounter for BiShvat, the project developed into an early tradition led by Neve Shechter with support of a local family and a local fund for Jewish education in Tel Aviv. The cooperation led to the opening of an art department and a photography track at the school. Students learned professional photography techniques all year round and prepare for the early exhibits in Neve Shechter. We couldn't have a regular exhibit due to the COVID crisis, but we created this online catalog of the project along the years. each year we found a different topic to deal with it, and leading photographers also volunteer to teach classes and help the students get better at their skills. So maybe this help you remember how Neve Tzedek looks like in its wild nature and in its urban side. So 5 exhibits were curated by the Schechter Gallery director, Shira Friedman, and they were shown at our synagogue and at our main hall and Bet Midrash. Every year we open the exhibits with a Tu BiShvat Seder with all the participating photographers and the surrounding community. This year, we wanted to expand a little bit more, and we want to get our exhibit to the public sphere. So thanks to the successful collaboration amongst the organizations and the donors and the municipality, we're developing the project to deal with new topics and new holidays and to get more public exposure. We're working on an exhibit that will show large-scale photographs of the nature and social landscape of Neve Tzedek on the bridges of its newly opened railway park. So 2 months ago, a new park was opened here a minute from Neve Schechter, where the old railway that led from Jaffa to Jerusalem would go. And now we want to create a new exhibit called Bridges that will not only show the different perspective on Tel Aviv bridges, but also the bridges, the metaphorical bridge between Pesach and Shavuot. We're hoping that all the restrictions will let us do it by then, but we're asking for the municipality to let us show the new exhibit there. I want to show you the simulation of how it's going to look like. Next one, 2. So this is one of the bridges, and this is the other one. We want to bring large-scale pictures and photographs to be part of the neighborhood and be shared by lots of people. So the whole project has a Jewish side, has a community side, has an environmental side, and we really wanted to grow. And we thought that maybe a beautiful text that can help us think of the next exhibit or the next meetings could be this text about creation as well. This time a quote from Bereshit Rabbah from the Midrash that I wanted to share with you. It doesn't let me. Wait, just a second. Wow. Share screen. Okay. So, כל מה שנברא בששת ימי בראשית צריך עשייה. כגון החרדל צריך למיתוק, התורמוסין צריכים למיתוק, החיטים צריכים להיטחן, ואפילו אדם צריך תיקון. Anything created in the first 6 days of creation need further actions. For example, mustard seeds need sweetening, peas needs sweetening, wheat needs grinding, and even humans need fixing. So if Rabbi Arbib started this project with the idea that God renews every day constantly the act of creation, we would like to add to that beautiful and hopeful idea that creation itself needs further actions to be fixed. And we are here to work for it and to be inspiration for others also to get there and model ourselves on God's example to plant new seeds in our lives, to find beauty and awe every morning when we see the recreation of the world, to sweeten our surroundings and to create and to live a dynamic life. So these are the values that Neve Shechter wants to offer to the students and the neighbors, and also to you all for this coming to BiShvat. I'm sure this was not a very easy year for any of us and any of you, but if you think that you just can take a walk and take a deep breath and maybe bring your telephone or your camera and try to find little sparks of creation in your surroundings, maybe it can make you smile. It can make you feel better and find a true connection through your own eyes. So I'd like to say thank you to all of you for listening to our projects and being part of this. I'm very much hoping to get to know you all when you come to Tel Aviv, and I'm ready to for questions if you have.
Romina, how many kids are in the project every year, and what are their ages?
So they are from prep and high school. So 14 to 18 years old, and they are 30 students each year. Some of them are kids that go on every year, and they are permanent participants, and sometimes the new kids join.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very nice, Yafa. Other questions, comments about the exhibits?
I can send you the link to the website if you wanna check out the exhibit.
Well, it certainly is very creative. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Yes, I would like the website, please.
Sure. I'm sending the link on the chat.
Right, it's on the chat at the bottom from Romina.
Thank you very much. And the project on the bridges is fabulous. Are you doing it? Is it transparent? Are they transparencies?
No, no.
So that you can see it from both sides?
Well, that's a great idea. I was thinking that we can have like double. No, if it's transparent, it won't work. But I think maybe we can do double, one from here.
The same picture on both sides.
Exactly. They just started going on photography tours, but due to the lockdown, now it's all closed, and we're all, every time we have like a week here and there, we try to go further.
Well, we hope that by Pesach, you'll be able to do the the bridges exhibit.
I think that's a great idea to spread it, expand it to other places in Israel.
Right.
It doesn't have to be staying in the Beit Tzedek. I think it's something very interesting that can go all over.
Yes, that's our next step. I think that working with these kids that really don't have the possibility of be creative in many ways. It's so amazing. So my dream is to work with the whole Reshet, the whole the video.
The whole network. The whole network.
Network. Of schools for children with special ed.
Yes.
In all over Israel, and maybe we can create a program, maybe for BiShvat or for another Chag, and it's pretty easy to replicate other places. So yeah, it's really nice.
You know that there are some schools and associations for phototherapy in Israel.
Right.
And they work a lot with children or youth with disabilities, with different kinds of disabilities. And it could be a very, very nice joint project for the whole country that can be then taken over to other places in the world, actually, to show what creativity can actually create within people, but not just with people with disabilities, but with people in general. We're all created in the image. So we are all creations, and we need to be creative. And this is a wonderful way of spreading creativity.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'll write down the photo therapy.
Any other questions or comments about Romina's presentation?
I have a question, actually. It may be addressed to you, Rabbi. You know, the whole concept of tikkun, like she mentioned, I read elsewhere that we are actually further participating to creation rather than fixing, because you would think that the creator is better at fixing it. And I was just wondering, what exactly should we understand behind the notion of tikkun? Is it that we are damaging and we are responsible and need to fix our damage? Or is it more or less, God gave us the fundamentals of creation and we're continuing to evolve them?
Well, of course, the word tikkun appears in the Mishnah and the tractate of Gittin, where it's called the tikkun olam, fixing the world. And there it's in a very narrow sense of doing things to get along with our neighbors, Jews and non-Jews. The ones who really picked up on the concept of tikkun were the Kabbalists. The tikkun Leil Shavuot, which began with the Kabbalists, is by staying up all night studying Torah, you're somehow repairing the world. And don't ask me how, because I'm not an expert in Kabbalah. And that's why the Kabbalists have a tikkun both for Shavuot, for Hoshana Rabbah, and even for Tu BiShvat. So this concept of tikkun was very, very important to the Kabbalists. And that is indeed one of the reasons there's a Seder Tu BiShvat, because it's part of that whole 16th century milieu of Safed, of doing tikkun. But other than that, I can't add a lot. If there's an expert here on Kabbalah who wants to add more on tikkun, please feel free to jump in. Okay, I think we're about to conclude. First of all, I want to thank Maria Karsagi Aron, who is the staff person at Schechter. There she is, who's in charge of organizing all of these, not tikkunim, but zoomim in Hebrew, the plural of Zoom. And we thank you very much, Maria, for all your help. This is the 4th time, and we hope to continue doing this for Purim, Pesach, Shavuot, and so on. Toda rabah. We thank our speakers, Dr. Perry Sinclair from Tali, Dr. Gila Bachman from Machon Schechter and the Schechter Rabbinical Seminary, and Romina Racine from Neve Schechter. We wish all of you a very happy Tu BiShvat. And as Romina said, even if you can't go far from your houses because of the pandemic, even if you can just absorb the nature around your house by taking pictures and eating fruits on Tu BiShvat Dayenu. And what I didn't mention in my introduction is that the Kabbalists of Tzvat used to eat 30 different types of fruit at the Seder Tu BiShvat. To me, that sounds like too much of a good thing, but at least if we can try and eat the Shiva Minim, the 7 species with which the land of Israel is blessed, as outlined in the book of Devarim, Dayenu, that too will be enough. I hope you have a lovely Tu BiShvat. I hope you will join us in the future. And in terms of the last idea that came up in the discussion with Romina, if you know of any people interested in funding these type of photo exhibits for special ed teenagers and expanding this program, it's not something that had occurred to me, but it really sounds like a wonderful idea of using Romina's project as a role model for other cities in Israel as well as in the diaspora. Toda rabah and Tu BiShvat Sameach.
Chag Sameach. It's great to see you. Bye-bye.
Toda rabah.
Shalom, shalom.
Yitrot.
תודה.
The Me'organim, to the organizers.
Hi. Marian, hi.
Hi, Hannah.
Thank you for that's are we the only ones from here that came into that? Do you hear me?
Okay, going.
Do you hear me, Marian?
Yeah.
I asked if we are we the only ones from Carmiel that joined?
No, I don't think so. I don't know. I'll find out.
I haven't seen anybody else.
Okay, good that we were here.
Okay, yes, good to see you.
Okay. Shavuot Tov. Take care.
Shavuot Tov.
Bye.